Once upon a time, in the grand kingdom of Harath, King Jorun ruled with wisdom and fairness. His reign marked by prosperity and peace. The king had 5 queens, each contributing uniquely to the vibrancy of the court. As the queens' pregnancies progressed, the kingdom buzzed with excitement. It was a rare and joyous event that all 5 queens were due to give birth around the same time. The people of Harath anticipated the arrival of new royal heirs, hoping for the birth of a prince to secure the future of the kingdom. Queen Ailoria, the first wife, was known for her strength and ambition, having borne the king 3 daughters. Queen Leora, the youngest and most innocent of the queens, was deeply loved by the people for her kindness and grace. Despite her naivety, she possessed a gentle wisdom that endeared her to the king and court. When the time came, each queen went into labor, filling the palace with the cries of newborns. Joy turned to euphoria when it was announced that Queen Leora had given birth to a son, the first male child born to the king. According to Harald's ancient tradition, the firstborn son would inherit the throne, regardless of which wife bore him. This tradition set the stage for envy and intrigue among the queens. Queen Ailoria in particular could not hide her disappointment and jealousy. Having 3 daughters, she had hoped for a son to secure her dominance in the court. The birth of Leora's son threatened her position and her heart filled with bitterness. The other queens, though not as openly resentful, also felt the sting of jealousy as they realized their own children would not ascend to the throne. When Leora's son was celebrated throughout Harath, the kingdom rejoiced, and the people believed this prince would bring a golden age of prosperity. The palace was filled with festivities, and King Jorun, overjoyed at the birth of his heir, showered Leora with love and gifts. The court celebrated for days, and the king declared a month-long festival to honor the birth of the prince. Leora, although overjoyed, sensed the underlying tension among the other queens. She saw the forced smiles and heard the whispered conversations. While the king and the people celebrated, the palace was echoed with the murmurs of jealousy and conspiracy. Queen Ailora envy was the most palpable. She watched Riola with a cold, calculating gaze, her mind already scheming to turn the tide in her favor. Despite the growing tension, Leora remained focused on her newborn son. She named him Alaric, a name that symbolized strength and wisdom. She dedicated herself to caring for him, a heart filled with love and hope for his future. Alaric's presence brought light into her life, and she found solace in his innocent eyes, unaware of the dark clouds gathering around them. The other queens, particularly Ailora, began to distance themselves from Leora. Their cordiality masked deeper resentment and fear. They whispered among themselves, plotting ways to ensure their own children's future were secured. Ailora, with her strong personality and influence, quickly became the leader of these secretive meetings. As the festival celebrating Larry's birth continued, Leora remained oblivious to the full extent of the animosity brewing around her. She was an innocent soul, more focused on nurturing her son than navigating the treacherous waters of palace politics. Her naivety, though endearing, left her vulnerable to the schemes of the more cunning queens. Queen Ailoria's jealousy grew with each passing day. Her daughters, though cherished by the king, could not inherit the throne. Ailoria had always been ambitious, and the birth of Alaric threatened her long held aspirations. She saw Leora's son as an obstacle to her own path for power and influence. Auloria began to gather the other queens, subtly playing on their insecurities and fears. Queen Beatrix, the second wife, had 2 sons and a daughter, but none of her boys were firstborn. Queen Cressida, the third wife, had twin daughters, and Queen Drusilla, the fourth wife, had a son and a daughter. Each of these queens felt the sting of knowing their children would never rule. Using her persuasive skills, Ailora convinced them that something had to be done about Alaric. She played on their fears, suggesting that Leora's son would grow up to overshadow their own children. She painted a picture of a future where their offspring would be sidelined and forgotten. The queens, swayed by Alora's rhetoric, began to agree with her. The conspiracy started small, with whispered conversations in hidden corners of the palace. Ailora's ambition and cunning drove the plans forward, and the other queens, although initially hesitant, found themselves drawn into her web. Ailora's influence over them grew, and they began to look to her for guidance on how to handle the perceived threat of Alaric. Ailora knew she needed more than just the support of the queens. She needed the backing of someone with influence over the king and the kingdom. She set her eyes on Eldrin, the chief spiritualist of Harath. Eldrin was a man of great power and respect. His words often seen as the voice of the gods. If she could turn him to her cause, her plan would have a much greater chance of success. Ailoria approached Eldrin with a mix of subtlety and intimidation. She knew the spiritualist was a man of principles, but she also knew he feared losing his position. Eldrin's influence over the king and the kingdom was immense, and Ailoria was determined to exploit this. In a secret meeting, Ailoria laid out her plan. She told Eldrin that the spirits had communicated with her, expressing displeasure at the birth of Alaric. She fabricated a prophecy claiming that the spirits had revealed to her that Alaric's existence would bring a 5-year famine and a string of military defeats to Harath unless he was removed. Eldrin, initially skeptical, listened to Aloria, threatened his position. She warned him that if he did not comply, she would accuse him of false prophecies and have him removed. Eldrin, torn between his duty and his fear of losing his status, reluctantly agreed to support Aloria's lie. The next day, Eldrin made a public declaration before the king and the court. He announced that the spirits had spoken, condemning Alaric as an abomination. According to Eldrin, the spirits warned that Alaric's presence would doom the kingdom. The court was thrown into chaos. King Jordan was devastated, unable to reconcile the joy of his son's birth and the dire prophecy. Queen Leora was heartbroken and terrified. She clung to Alaric, refusing to believe that her son could bring such misfortune. The other queens, meanwhile, watched with satisfaction as their plan unfolded. They pretended to be concerned, but inwardly they were relieved that their children's future were no longer overshadowed by Alaric. The king, torn by love for his son and duty to his kingdom, struggled with a decision. The court was divided, with some more nobles supporting Eldrin's prophecy and others questioning its validity. Elora, ever the manipulator, continued to press the issue, insisting that the only way to save the kingdom was to eliminate Alaric. Eldrin's proclamation sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The people who had celebrated the birth of the prince now whispered in fear and uncertainty. Eldrin, a respected spiritualist, had never been questioned before. His words were considered the voice of the gods, and his prophecy about Alaric struck terror into the hearts of many. King Jorun, faced with an impossible choice, summoned his advisors and the queens to discuss the matter. The palace was filled with tension as they gathered to hear Eldrin's words. The atmosphere was somber, and the weight of the prophets hung heavily over everyone. Eldrin, under Ailora's watchful eye, reiterated his prophecy. He described visions of famine, drought, and military defeat. He claimed that the spirits had shown him the destruction of Harath if Alaric were allowed to live. The court was silent, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Queen Leora, clutching her son, stood before the king. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was steady as she pleaded for her child's life. She refused to believe that Alaric was an abomination and begged the king to reconsider. Her words moved many in the court, but the fear of the prophecy was strong. Ailoria, seizing the moment, spoke of her loyalty to the kingdom and the need to protect it from harm. She argued that as much as it pained them, they had to follow Eldrin's prophecy to save Harath. The other queens, emboldened by Ailoria's stance, voiced their agreement. They spoke of their own children's future and the need to safeguard the kingdom. The king, torn between his love for Leora and Alaric and his duty to the kingdom, felt the crushing weight of the decision. He turned to Eldrin, asking if there was any other way to appease the spirits. Eldrin, under Ailoria's influence, insisted that the only way to avert disaster was to eliminate Alaric. Leora's heart was shattered, but her spirit remained unbroken. She refused to accept Eldrin's prophecy and the court's decision to get rid of her son. Her maternal instincts and love for Alaric fueled her resolve. She knew she had to protect him at all costs. The court's decision was announced, and Leora was given the task of carrying out the grim act. They believed that if the mother of the child performed the ritual, it would appease the spirits and cleanse the kingdom of the supposed curse. Leora, horrified and devastated, could not fathom the idea of harming her own child. In the dead of night, as the palace slept, Leora wept over Alaric's crib. She prayed for guidance, seeking a way to save her son. Her tears fell on Alaric's sleeping face, her heart heavy with sorrow and fear. She felt utterly alone, with no one to turn to for help. The next morning, Leora was brought before the court. Iloria, watching with cold satisfaction, demanded that she follow through with the prophecy. The other queens echoed her sentiments, masking their relief with forced concern. The king, unable to look at Leora, gave his silent consent, his heart breaking with every moment. As Leora was led to the ceremonial ground, she clung to Alaric, whispering words of love and comfort to her son. Her mind raced, searching for a way to save him. The palace guards and courtiers watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the burden of the decision. At the last moment, Riola refused to carry out the act. She fell to her knees, clutching Alaric tightly, and declared that she would rather die than harm her son. Her defiance shocked the court, and murmurs of dissent spread through the crowd. Iloria's face twisted in anger as she saw her plan begin to unravel. In the crowd, a young spiritualist named Arin watched the scene unfold. Unlike Eldrin, Arin had a compassionate heart and a sense of justice. He could not bear to see the innocent prince harmed and was moved by Leora's courage and love for her son. Though he feared the consequences, he knew he had to act. Arin had studied the ancient arts and knew of a powerful spell that could save Alaric. It was a risky and complex incantation, but Arin was determined to try. Under the cover of night, he approached Leora, who was still holding Alaric close, her eyes filled with despair. Whispering softly, Aaron revealed his plan to Leora. He told her he could create a magical dummy to take Alaric's place, sparing the prince's life. Leora, though wary, saw the sincerity in Aaron's eyes and agreed to trust him. She knew it was their only hope. Using his skills, Aaron cast the spell, creating a lifelike replica of Alaric. The dummy was enchanted to resemble the prince perfectly, even emanating a faint life force. Aaron and Leora knew they had to act quickly before the court discovered their plan. The next day, Leora brought the dummy to the ceremonial ground, her heart pounding with fear and hope. The court gathered, and Eldrin prepared to bless the ritual. Unaware of the switch, Alora and the other queens watched with anticipation, believing their plan was coming to fruition. Riola, with trembling hands, carried out the ritual on the dummy. The court, seeing the act, believed the prophecy was fulfilled. As the supposed life force of Alaric dissipated, they felt a collective sense of relief. Ilora, though satisfied, did not notice the subtle difference. After the ritual, Leora, her heart heavy with grief for the deception, thanked Irene for his bravery. She knew they had only bought some time and that they needed to find a way to keep Alaric safe in the long term. Irene promised to help her, knowing they had to act quickly and wisely. With the ritual complete, the court believed the kingdom was safe. However, Leora and Ari knew they had to leave the palace to protect Alaric from further danger. Leora decided to feign illness, giving her a reason to withdraw from court life and buy time to plan their escape. Leora's absence from the court was explained as a period of mourning and recovery. She stayed secluded in her chambers, tending to Alaric and preparing for their departure. Aaron worked discreetly, gathering supplies and making arrangements for the journey. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, Leora and Aaron made their escape from the palace. They traveled through hidden passages known only to a few. avoiding the palace guards and anyone who might recognize them. Leora carried Alaric close to her chest, her heart racing with fear and determination. The journey was arduous, but Leora and Aaron were driven by their love for Alaric and their resolve to keep him safe. They traveled for days, moving through forests and villages, always wary of being followed. The bonds of trust and friendship grew stronger between them as they faced the challenges together. Eventually, they reached a remote village far from Halath's border. There, they sought refuge with Morgana, an old witch who had been banished from the kingdom years earlier under false accusation by Ailoria. Morgana, though initially wary, welcomed them once she heard their story and saw Alaric. Morgana agreed to help hide Alaric and care for him. She used her knowledge of magic to create wards around her home, ensuring they would remain undetected by anyone who sought to harm them. Leora and Harry were grateful for Morgana's assistance, knowing that Alaric was in safe hands. With a heavy heart, Leora bid farewell to Alaric, promising to return with food and supplies. She had to maintain the reuse of her illness, visiting Morgana's home only at night to avoid suspicion. Though it pained her to be apart from her son, she knew it was only to ensure his safety. Queen Leora returned to the palace, her heart aching with the separation from Alaric. To maintain her cover, she continued to feign illness, rarely leaving her chambers. The court, believing her to be grieving and unwell, left her in peace. Ailoria and the other queens, satisfied that the threat was eliminated, turned their attention back to courtly matters. Each night, under the cover of darkness, Leora would sneak out of the palace to visit Morgana and Alaric. She brought food, clothing, and anything else they might need. The journey was fraught with danger, but Leora's love for her son gave her the strength and persevere. Morgana, true to her word, cared for Alaric as if he were her own. The old witch, with her knowledge of herbs and magic, ensured the boy thrived. She taught him about the natural world, instilling in him a deep respect for life and nature. Alaric, though young, showed signs of the wisdom and strength that would one day make him a great king. As the months passed, Leora's visits became routine. She and Morgana formed a bond, united by their love for Alaric and their shared purpose. Morgana, who had lived a life of solitude and bitterness, found a new meaning in caring for the prince and aiding Leora in her quest to protect him. Aaron, ever loyal, continued to support Leora in any way he could. He helped her maintain the rules of her illness and ensure that no one suspected her nighttime excursions. His position as a spiritualist allowed him to move within the palace with some freedom, and he used this to keep an eye on Leora and the other queens. Despite the dangers and the constant threat of discovery, Leora found solace in these visits. Each night, as she held her son and whispered words of love and hope, she drew strength from his presence. She vowed to continue protecting him no matter the cost. As the months turned into years, King Jorun's health began to deteriorate. The stress of ruling the kingdom, combined with the loss of his only son, took a toll on him. He became frail and weak, his once vibrant spirit dimmed by sorrow and regret. The people of Harath watched with growing concern as their beloved king's health declined. The palace was filled with whispers and worries about the future. The absence of a male heir weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Ailoria and the other queens, seeing the king's frailty, grew bolder in their ambitions. They began to vie for more power and influence, each hoping to secure a better future for their own children. Leora, still maintaining her facade of illness, could do little to help the king. Her heart ached to see her husband in such a state, but she knew she had to remain focused on protecting Alaric. She continued her nightly visits to Morgana's home, finding solace in the knowledge that her son was safe and thriving. This is the end of our part 1 story. Look out for part 2. In order for you not to miss part 2 and many other stories, please subscribe to the channel. Bye for now. Thank you.